Rupaina, I think we can begin now.
Hello, sorry, my camera. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our last session on the consultations for the Mumbai Climate Action Plan. Today, we are going to focus on urban flooding and water resource management issues. And we have actually a fairly concise panel for today due to some emergencies that other speakers had. So we actually might be able to kind of do a more, once speakers are have put in their recommendations, we can do some closing comments at the end. And also just want to recommend to all the speakers, our participants do put their thoughts, comments, recommendations in the chat window as well as in the Q&A. So please feel free to respond in Q&A and in the chat window as well. Pick up on some of the themes that others are bringing up, and create kind of more of that participation while you're speaking, because this is a limitation of this mode of conducting a consultation virtually. Where we really can't be as transparent and as collaborative in the discussion, but really would like you guys to help us kind of make it more collaborative. So yeah, before we start, just want to thank MCGM for their collaboration and providing the space for all these days, and having various department heads join these sessions and sort of hear the feedback that everyone's been giving. My thanks to Vatavaran and Climate Voices for the support through this entire process. So with this, I just want to have my colleague Prutha share some initial findings from the flooding and water resource management action track. Thank you.
Prutha, you're muted if you're trying to speak. Yeah. Can you hear me?
There's a lot.
Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Hello? Yeah. Okay, I'll start then. So it's thank you everyone for joining today's session, and it's an honor to be part of this discussion and present our initial findings for this sector on urban planning and water resource management. Um, uh, so taking time.
Prutha, we lost you.
Okay. Mumbai is actually as
Sorry, Prutha, we can't hear you. I would suggest please turn off your camera. Maybe there's a bandwidth issue.
mix and so it's basically an estuary where it joins into the Arabian Sea, and it's a natural drainage geographically. But because of the natural drainage systems which help us in thing with was that we can see in I think I'll just stop my video, like stop sharing my video, because that will help me back with this. So, yeah, as I was mentioning, so because it's coastal city.
Lubena, do you want to try sharing the presentation from yours instead of Prutha? It seems to be a connectivity issue with Prutha.
Okay. Okay. So this map shows projected sea level based on several scientific studies. This map indicates the projected sea level rise with the city within the city limits. And so I mean, given that we have been experiencing extreme climate now, like for the past decade. So it based on a preliminary analysis, we can see that there are almost like 5 very heavy and 4 extremely heavy rainfall events per year in the last 10 years. So we can see that we've all experiencing regular extreme events. Specifically focusing on certain events such as cyclone update.
Sorry, we're just having a really poor connection today. Should I share with us?
Do you want to share it with me?
I can just share it with you.
Yeah, you made it to me.
ये क्या है? इसमें मतलब
इसमें कनेक्ट करूं?
इसका अच्छा है क्या?
हाँ, इसका अच्छा है.
क्या नाम
Can
है?
you mute yourself?
Sorry about that.
Hello.
Okay.
Yeah. Considering the rainfall events that we're experiencing, specifically, like we've been also experiencing the city has been prone to several cyclones in the past couple of years, for Cyclone Taukte, at a certain point within the 3 days of recording the sea level rise, at time it was the sea level rise was almost up almost a meter. How coastal inundation will be more real especially in times of high tide. If we look at the spatial distribution and the frequency of events, this is what it looks like. So we can see that areas such as Malad, Bhandup, BKC, and the other have experienced extremely heavy rainfall events, and that's in the past decade. That's the thing. But MCGM has taken initiatives to identify frequently flooding locations, and these are the map on the left hand side indicates the flooding locations. But when we try to understand the accessibility, so in order to overcome the situation, there are flood shelters also provided in within the city. So the map in the inside shows the temporary shelters which are built within the city limits, and the larger map shows the accessibility to these flood shelters within 1 kilometer of walking distance. So we can see that there are certain areas around Goregaon and Jogeshwari, Malad areas, and then in the Marathur area, which is the enemy spot. So these are some areas where the citizens and the residents are not able to access the flood shelters within 1 kilometer distance. So this is especially critical or creates risk for the slum population, which is almost 41% of the total population, which makes them like really vulnerable to coastal flooding events. But when we look at the supply level, the service level provisions, this is what it looks like. So although the city has a per capita water supply of 268 LPCD, which is way above the national standards, that's 150. But when we look at the ward level, the differences are such. So if you look at any ward that has like almost like 50 to 60%, 65% of households in those wards having water connection within this premises, and this is based on data from the census 2011. But the corporation is taking several initiatives in this sector. So basically, recently there have been desalination projects which are proposed, which will help in reducing the burden on the water supply. Within the city. Also, under the Mati Vasundhara campaign, rainwater harvesting is being promoted actively. In terms of sanitation, although there is minimal difference, like a nominal increase in the sewage generated, that's 22.23%, but there are differences in collections and treatments. Again, when we look at how many households have access to sanitation services within their premises, this is what the scenario looks like. So almost like 7-8 wards have like 50% of the population or the households, 50% of the households have access to natural services within their premises. The Mumbai sewage disposal project phase 2 is also looking towards creating sewage networks within these informal settlements. Also, recently, the National Green Tribunal has suggested new discharge standards for sewage discharge. So, and MCGM is keen on providing sewer connections within these slum areas. So, that's what it. And In terms of stormwater drainage, based on the observations in the Brimstowald report, which is the stormwater drainage report, the capacity capacity of the stormwater drainage network is around 25 mm/hour. That is at low tide. But one of the issues which is the 64% length of the stormwater drainage is 64% of it is roadside open drains, which is susceptible to disposal of waste and contamination with sewage, which creates larger issues. But in terms of the initiatives taken, so the corporation has is taking initiative to create underground holding tanks, and recently the underground holding tank in Hindmata area junction was completed. The construction of that tank was completed. Also, new project under Mithi River cleanup has been initiated. So we are hoping that such initiatives, if they continue, we'll have the city will be better able to tackle the so summarizing key issues in terms so there is a natural topography where we have existing low-lying areas, but we are also we need to ensure that there is no enforcement along the natural areas like rivers and mangroves, and reduce the built-up areas in the city. In terms of water provision, there is a demand supply cap of 650 ml, but a connection to the slum area is what is required, which is resulting in the households in slum areas depending on buying water from tankers, which is leading to an informal market over there. In terms of sanitation, the lack of sewage network coverage is one issue, and of course the differences in generation, collection, and treatment. In terms of barriers, we can focus it basically highlights that there are these three sectors where there are barriers. So in terms of data, so there is a requirement for a robust data monitoring and crowdsourcing of data from different sources. Integrating nature-based solutions in our land use planning and enforcement of stringent rules. In terms of infrastructure and policy, there is a requirement to augment the infrastructure to meet future requirements, and better implementation of policies such as rainwater harvesting. So if we try and approach the sector in terms of so we'll have these 4 pillars basically: that access, monitor, manage, and plan. And these are some of the key suggestions. This is not an exhaustive list, but just pointers to some of the actions that can be included, which is upgrading infrastructure and stringent regulation of policies. In terms of monitoring, better real-time data so that we can make informed decisions, ensuring completion of projects. In terms of managing, we need to look at the current consumption patterns and also what the future demands are, and flood risk management so that we can reduce the runoff and also increase storage. And in terms of planning, if we have we can assess future climate scenarios, and again focusing on the issue of where we can integrate nature-based solutions into our land use planning. So I think that's it. And
thanks, Prutha. Since we've already lost some time to tech failures today, I think we'll get into the panel discussion immediately. So just want to invite Nikhil Anand, who is Associate Professor of Anthropology at the University of Pennsylvania and has also been leading the Inhabited Seas project across many researchers and practitioners working on issues of flooding and waterlogging in Mumbai. Nikhil?
Thank you, Alabena, and thanks to your team at
Nikhil, we can't hear you. Maybe you need to unmute. Or oh, we can hear you.
Can you hear me okay? Okay. No worries. Thank you, Lavina. Thank you, your team at WRI, the group at Vatavaran, Climate Voices, and also the DNC. Congratulations on this work. It's an important beginning. It was quite unthinkable 2 years ago, and it's happening now. It's a long and wet road ahead, though. To cover the points I wanted to make in the time that I have, I'll read my comments, and I hope that's okay. And I'm happy to share them with you after. So as we've talked about this past 6 days, 6 consultations, we know now that climate change is here in Mumbai, now in the city. There are more very heavy rain days, new cyclones that never used to happen before. Storm surges are always possible. And the rate of sea level rise has actually tripled in the last 2 decades. What does this mean? What does this mean for a
You're on mute, Nikhil. Sorry.
Flooding is a direct result of the city's relentless reclamation over the last 300 years, and this is a project that has not stopped despite the CRZ. As a result, flooding is something all residents in Mumbai know well, but now flooding has gotten worse, it's more frequent and more widespread. Now, many of us got concerned about the futures of the city when we saw those climate central maps published in Nature last year that were taken up in the news media, that Mumbai would be underwater by 2050. There's 2 clarifications that are necessary for that to understand those maps. Those maps represent scenarios if we do nothing, right? If Mumbai does no mitigation and no adaptation, right? Second, and that's not necessarily the case. Second, the map suggests that more of Mumbai will be underwater more of the time, right? And not all of the time. And this is important. So we're not talking about a permanent inundation of much of the city, not apocalypse in that sense, but everyday difficulties will intensify in wet months. They will be very costly, even more costly than they are already, both in terms of loss of life and property. So much depends on how we plan and adapt to the inevitable presence of more sweet water and more saline water in the city. This is not to say that there are not catastrophic threats, but these come not from flooding, but more from cyclones and storm surges and infrastructural breakdowns that accompanies these events in many other parts of the world. We're talking about power lines, gas lines, the city's energy and nuclear installations. They're all vulnerable to storm surges and extreme and cyclones. And so for these, the city actually needs a disaster management plan and contingency plans to strengthen this infrastructure, to change building standards in the city to withstand cyclones that will be coming more to Mumbai in the future. Now, can climate adaptation planning help against annual flooding? Yes, it can make disasters less bad, but it cannot do this as traditional planning, as traditional land use planning, because land use planning is very limited and very siloed. It is also very solid. Traditional planning assumes land is dry, but Mumbai is always wet. We can think of humidity, but also tides, rains, wells, wetlands, and sinkholes are all over the city all of the time. Land use planning also does not value water or the natural infrastructures that hold water. Creeks, wetlands, nalas, talabs, the sea. Our coastlines and coast life is completely neglected in planning for the city. And arguably also thus far, we've not talked about it enough in the climate adaptation planning process as well. Wetlands and seas are typically seen as by land use plans as spaces that might become future land one day, right? But it's important to understand wetlands and intertidal regions as natural infrastructure that Mumbai's residents need to live. They hold water for free. In the urban greening session yesterday, we learned about the immense benefits of carbon sequestration and flood control offered by mangroves. The value of these spaces is not calculated, so their loss is assumed not to cost the city. For example, large infrastructure projects like the coastal road and metros are proposed without studying how much the loss of permeable space in intertidal regions and subsurface areas will cost the city in future flooding. As the Environment Minister said last week, there has to be a climate lens for every infrastructural development, or it is not development. So specific recommendations. Currently, agencies taking up infrastructure projects, for example, the Navi Mumbai Airport, have to pay compensation to the Forest Department and the Mangrove Foundation for cutting and transplanting mangroves. Now, the compensation rate, last fixed by the MOEF in 2009, is currently not even the cost of land in Mumbai. So the compensation rate is about 10 lakh rupees a hectare. And this figure needs to be updated for the city and to reflect the cost of not only the land, but also the environmental services and infrastructure services offered by mangroves to the city. Now, this is done for mangroves in the presentation we heard yesterday, but it is also the case for all other kinds of wetlands in the city that are performing important drainage and stormwater functions. The city needs to ask, where are these many natural infrastructures located? How can they be protected and designed and encouraged and multiplied to hold city water for some part of every year? And how much do these services actually cost in terms of like what are the environmental services that, in economic terms that these natural infrastructures are doing? These are, I would say, more cost effective than hard engineering solutions such as the underground water retention tanks that are being built. Now, these spaces are also valuable commons. Already fishers and others are using them in different ways at different times of the month and the year. And this is economical, it's ecological, and it's also actually the way of the future. Climate adaptation plans need to support and multiply urban common spaces for multiple uses. Areas by shorelines and areas in creeks and rivers are not only potential recreation spaces, but also critical flood infrastructures, walking paths, and carbon mitigation spaces all at once. And this is especially important for a congested city like Mumbai that does not have the space to have different functions for different spaces. So the city, okay, that's one. The next point I want to make is the city needs to see connections between different water bodies in the city because they're always mixing all the time. Nalas, even by the BMC's own designs, or even the Mithi River, holds sewage. Rivers hold storm water. Sea enters rivers and wetlands, leaking piped water recharges underground aquifers. And as waters mix and flows together, it's important to see these as part of a single system and not separately. And there's great work by architects in Mumbai that have done a comprehensive watershed analysis that includes the work not only of nalas and rivers, but also stormwater drains and sewage lines to see how these actually respond to rainfall events. And that kind of integrative work needs to be explored by the BMC. I'd like to make a brief point about water and sanitation infrastructures. Contrary to what we oftentimes hear, I can say with confidence that there is no water shortage, no water scarcity in the city. I've studied the BMC figures since 2005. I've talked to BMC engineers, junior and senior alike, who all agree about this. You can simply do the math. There's 3,500 million liters for 15 million people. This is about more than 200 liters per person per day, which is about the water that people in London and Tokyo receive. The problem is not with supply or sources, but distribution and leakages. Since 1930, we found, and this is like when the Stanza Dam was built, we found that adding new supply, be it a new dam or a new desalination plant, will not solve the problem. New supply infrastructure and new source infrastructures actually create new problems. For example, new dams, as has been talked about last week, cause massive deforestation and also displacement. New desalination plants that are being proposed will consume lots of energy and therefore produce a lot of carbon emissions, but also raise sea surface temperatures that are harmful for marine biodiversity. There are more effective responses to Mumbai's piped water problems. First, the leakages in the network need to be reduced. By the BMC's own studies, the leakages account for approximately 1,000 million liters a day. This is far in excess of what the Middle Vetarna Dam produced, which is about 500 MLD, after a lot of construction, a lot of supply, a lot of deforestation, a lot of displacement, right? We can talk about rainwater harvesting systems, but I think we also need to remember that Mumbai has many wells.
Nikhil, you have 2,000 seconds, sorry.
In 2009, a year of less rainfall, the BMC found and renovated 12,351 wells. These need to continue to be maintained because they're a resource for the city in times of water scarcity. And finally, we need to recognize that despite and with climate change, there's everyday water insecurity in the city, where many of Mumbai slum residents do not have access to water. And the city should extend access to all so that there's no everyday insecurity and vulnerability. So 1 second to conclude, not even 1 minute. After the 2006 floods, July 2005 floods, city experts said, what can we do? This is a 1 in 100-year event. Once we upgrade our stormwater drains, which is the committee report said, our drainage system will be good enough. But those normal times are few now. That 100-year event happened many other times since 2005, including twice this year in June and then July. In Houston, Texas, we had 3 500-year floods in 2 years. So efforts to project a future drainage necessity based on past history is limited. We cannot expect to drain the seas, rains, and storms of the future through these conventional technologies. But with new waterscape approaches, we can find ways for all of the city's residents, particularly those that live in informal housing, to be able to live better. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nikhil. Great comments, and really hope to kind of build on this narrative through the climate action plan. I'll call upon Professor Amita Bhide from who's the Dean of the Habitat School at Tata Institute of Social Sciences. Ma'am, if you can, yeah, great.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lubaina, WRI and Vatavaran, and of course the corporation for, I would say, finally taking a lead and organizing this, also operationalizing and going in for these consultations. So congratulations for that. I'm actually going to continue where perhaps Nikhil left off, going to talk a little bit about sanitation, which is also an equally everyday, equally important function. And the way in which I think sanitation is looked upon, I'll just make 3 or 4 major points more as a part of a perspective and depending on the status that Mumbai has. Number one, I think if one compares even nationally, Mumbai consistently ranks extremely low on the Swachhata surveys, all the Swachhata survekstions. I'm not a great fan of the Swachhata survekshan methodology at all, but to not even conform by some of those is in some ways a definite standard that one should put upon ourselves and even reflect upon what is the form and pattern of open defecation that we see in the city even now. And we will largely see that this is somewhere where it is not that we have no toilets, but we don't have sufficient toilets, and we definitely have no sanitation options for children and for senior citizens. The second thing, the most popular and I would say the most bet upon option that we use, which is either the public toilet or the community toilet. There has been at one point in time in around the 1990s, the community toilet was suggested as an option to Mumbai's sanitation woes, that these toilets would also be operated and managed by community-based organizations. About 20 years later, what we see is that the difference between community toilets and public toilets is extremely blurred, that the entire models of pay use, of CBO operation, most CBOs tend to overexploit the toilet facility basically because they want running expenses. Many of these are not, these revenues are not invested into the maintenance of toilet. We don't have a plan of maintaining toilets at all. And as a result, in Mumbai, every, I think, few months or so, we are now seeing incidences of death by toilet. I think there is no other shameful thing a country which is trying to get out of open defecation, a country which is trying to move out of manual scavenging, and we have death by toilets, which is perhaps even more shameful. And I think the only solution to this is to scale down the option of toilets even further, decentralize it to the level of it has to be sub-community, sub-local, extend those geographies as much, I would say, pair those geographies as much as possible. The closer that we can get to perhaps a household toilet option is something which is highly desirable. This brings me to the next point, which is that there is hardly any exploration of the individual toilet option in a concerted way by the municipal corporation at all. um, in the just in the M ward, we had submitted about 300 individual toilet household toilet options to the municipal corporation, and there has been no response on it. So this is lying with the municipal corporation for the last 3 years. So we definitely need as close as possible to thinking about household level toilets. I would perhaps also dare to say that household level toilets actually exist in many different informal settlements, but these are not recognized by the corporation. So, in some ways, trying to find sanitation options is actually going to be a challenge of identifying appropriate technical solutions, being prepared to live with the solutions, and to perhaps also do away with some, I would say, outlandish and impractical versions of safety. We have discussed this with many informal contractors who vouch with us and say that there are entire houses which have been built on septic tanks, um, and these have survived for more than 11, 12 years or so. This is not to say that one is confident that household toilets can be propagated in each and every area. But I definitely think there is a tremendous scope to expand that option. This option is not being explored actively by the municipal corporation and by other, I would say, informal settlement infrastructure providing agencies, basically because there is a huge vested political economy which supports the creation of toilets. This is the predominant way in which MLA and corporator funds are spent. So this is about sanitation options. In that concern, I would also like to humbly mention that the use of CSR funds, which is being done in recent years for the purpose of building toilets, is something which needs to be reviewed by the corporation for two reasons. Number one, the locations and the kinds of models which are being propagated by some of these CSR toilets. For example, one is creating great standards and creating AC toilets and whatnot, I would say. So I've seen 5-star toilets in China. So followed by that, when I've seen AC toilets in Mumbai. But these AC toilets, clearly their sustainability is usually under question. Or one has seen recent models of 3-story, 4-story toilets. One has also seen models supported by CSR where one is bringing together washing machines and there are essential facilities, and a sanitation facility definitely needs to be considered as an option. But all of these have to be done with due consideration with the surrounding communities and localities. uh, Thinking about sanitation option and connecting to the points which have been made by Nikhil, one very important assertion is often that there are public toilets, several public toilets I've seen, as well as community toilets, which release all their waste into nalas. So the assumption in nalas that nalas are only drainages. So firstly, our field studies reveal that mostly nalas are also, in several cases, natural streams which have been converted into drains. Then the use of these nalas overlaps so many. I mean, they are receptacles of solid waste. They are also receptacles of sewage. And as a result, these intersections between infrastructures that one is seeing, which are in engineering terms assumed to be carrying very different things, often also means that the technologies which are used for treatment don't work at all. And if Mumbai were to be assessed on the basis of what kind and what level of pollutants does one release into the sea, what happens as a result, interface between toilets and flooding is also a very important aspect. There are several vulnerable settlements where, because of the gradients and the contours of the land, and because there is a lack of a well-designed sewage infrastructure, one sees that nala waters, which also carry sewage, actually back up into houses, and houses and families cannot sleep overnight. Every time there is even a bit of a rain, houses get flooded. And this intersection between sanitation and water infrastructures should be therefore looked upon with a extremely close look. The final thing that I'm going to say is basically also that we need to think about the micro and local level planning as a very important aspect of all our planning, which is linked to flooding, drainage, water, and sanitation. I think in
Yes.
planning large scale infrastructure projects, we have somewhere forgotten that micro level planning, micro level and local level planning actually plays an extremely important role in actually. So every time settlements or even formal buildings and areas are struggling with, there are few years in which one part of a locality gets flooded, there is some drainage work or nala work or some improvement or contraction of a nala, and then there are other areas which get flooded. So what is being managed is something which is not clear at all. The contour mapping of Mumbai, I also understand, is not
Ma'am,
completely in
sorry to
place.
interrupt you,
So
but you can, sorry, if you can close in 30
yes,
seconds.
absolutely. And this is my last point really, that one needs to do contour mapping, and this contour mapping needs to be the reference point for all of these connections between infrastructures. In reading the concept map blog which was sent by WRI, I saw that some of these connections across infrastructures need to be actually expanded on. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. These are really very provocative ideas and ways that we need to sort of think about this sector more, and how the climate action plan can really become a platform to really address some of these broader questions of vulnerability and access. So thank you so much. I will now ask Roshni from YUVA, if she's the director of YUVA,
Yeah.
to speak.
Yeah, thanks, Lubena. Thanks, WRI, Vatavaran, and of course the corporation for having this, and also thanks for having practitioner perspectives. I think alongside scientific and academic perspectives, I think both are so important, and just to also ensure that we don't repeat each other. I think this is really an honor to be here. I think the context has been set very clearly. We have extreme events which are increasing, but also newer risks and newer vulnerabilities. I think that's important. And in the post-pandemic context, the migration patterns are also changing into a city like Mumbai, in and out, and the whole water sanitation and health context. And of course, I think the social and economic context also is changing. So I think it's important that these new vulnerabilities are also going to emerge in the next 5 to 10 years. And when we do talk about either flooding or issues of water equity and sewage, drainage, I think the impacts are felt most by the urban poor, those in informal settlements, bastis, migrants, homeless groups. And they are also often at the brunt of any mitigation efforts as well. So I think they're impacted not only by climate events, but also by many of the mitigation activities and interventions. And I think the remarks I intend to make today will be within that context of the urban poor in Mumbai, which itself is very heterogeneous and exposed to newer vulnerabilities. I think first I wanted to, in terms of sort of marrying both principles as well as a recommendation, because I think that is also very important. The scope of responses we have to issues of, say, flooding and adverse events, I think we really do need to look at a continuum of approaches, ranging from both discrete sectoral interventions, of which, of course, there are several options, but also long-term systemic changes, so that we are not only reactive. For instance, if we just consider the issue of landslides that has been recently in the news, temporary shelters for people impacted by landslides is a must, like Bharat Nagar and other places. But I think, and you also share the mapping of the informal settlements, of the informal shelters. But I think the plan also needs to be much more forward-looking and include long-term rehabilitation options for those who are at risk and most likely to be continuously getting affected by these landslides and floods. Like we have rehabilitation guidelines for infrastructure development projects. We have them for even slum upgradation projects. So I do think long-term rehabilitation guidelines for climate impact as well, particularly in terms of flooding and other water risks, is very important. And for people who do live in bastis and informal settlements most at risk, safe and adequate housing is a right and entitlement. And I think the plan needs to recognize that, else the discourse is always on encroachers, illegality, and just on immediate relief, right? So I think one important thing is looking at a continuum. Immediate relief is important, but if we do have that perspective of safe and adequate habitats, I do think we do need to look at more long-term changes. Another example is slums on the coastline. Apparently we've been reading that these are all mapped, and it's likely that evictions are going to be, beginning here. Again, we need to start conversations on rehabilitation on these, while we do understand the risks of being along coastlines and being in insecure housing. But what is the quality and nature of rehabilitation that is adequate? And I think in terms of sanitation, Amita has also given several examples that are not just reactive and temporary, but also looking at much more long-term changes. Similarly, I think moving from infrastructure-centric, conservative sort of disaster risk management to also preparedness, proactive preparedness for the extreme events that we are likely to face. Stormwater management, I think, is one of those things that we can predict and really prepare for. Nikhil has also spoken very extensively, and I really like the point of looking at natural infrastructure and how we leverage that versus always only proposing hard engineering solutions. I think if we do want to make sure that people who do live in informal settlements are able to stay out of the climate risk, then we do need these proactive preparedness that is happening. Another thing I think we need to look at is there's a lot of infrastructure projects that are happening, right? And the impact of these on both the flooding issues as well as the water equity, as well as landslides. I think, for instance, although Vaze is outside the BMC limits, but it's a good example of how the industrial corridor that is being built there is disturbing several natural and both human environments. And in an already low-lying area, this is going to have a huge impact going ahead. So I do think that the current plan, at least within the MCGM boundaries, really have a proactive approach to mapping the infrastructure projects that are already being planned and being implemented, so that, and we understand the EIAs, the SIAs that have been conducted, and ensure that there is a proactive approach to what impacts could be the outcome and the result of these sorts of projects, including the airport, for instance, in Navi Mumbai and so on. And I also think this was mentioned in one of yesterday's comments as well, that we're looking at issues like, floodplains and flooding and water supplies. I do think the regional basis has to be considered, right? We do have to acknowledge that, while we have land use plans at the both city and the regional level, and particularly this issue of equity and flooding is not going to always rest within the administrative boundaries. So how can we really start looking at the plan integrating a constant synergy at the MMR regional level, I think will also be important going ahead. And, I mean, I'm not an expert, of course, on this, but the power of nature-based solutions are, definitely important. But I do think that looking at the socioeconomic issues as well, and then overlaying with the nature-based solutions. I think that is an important entry point in terms of how we, you do that work. So overall, I mean, I think in terms of the approaches, systemic change, proactive, and also integrated, I think is what we need. You also did talk about moving on to knowledge and data. And, we do have several studies which are technical. We have geospatial studies. There are statistical exercises, sea level rise, impact of heat on coastlines, floodplain mapping, a lot of vulnerability studies, which are very, very critical. I do think simultaneously, we do need to have more social science and participatory research as well, looking at what are the adaptations that urban poor locations are undergoing, because risk and vulnerability often actually derives from people's socioeconomic conditions to the same climate event. So I think the plan should also prioritize this sort of knowledge generation, and actually come up with and ensure that there are operational, in that operational term of the plan, we do have enough socioeconomic focusing research, but also respecting local knowledge and including concrete action for co-producing knowledge. We do know about, adaptation by vendors, for instance, to extreme rainfall events. How do we institutionalize a place to make sure that that flow of knowledge also happens? Because I think ignoring local adaptation is not something we can afford at the pace at which, climate events and risks are happening. So I think that is important to incorporate that knowledge generation, which is both social science focused, but also local knowledge focused. I think another point is considering the existing policy and the environment and synergies and contradictions with that. For instance, this plan is not going to be in isolation, right? So, and there will be opportunities to both leverage and also pitfalls, specifically related to, say, the disaster management plan. There is talk about owner-driven construction post-rehabilitation. So how can we look at that for the rehabilitation guidelines that we might be developing for impact of climate changes? There are, the Disaster Management Authority also talks about decentralization, community-led. How do we really look at operationalizing some of that through this plan? I think would be important. But again, there are contradictions. The Mumbai DP talks about salt plan, land development. Now, what will be the impact of that? I think there are many experts who can really talk about the deleterious impact of that. So how do we ensure that those contradictions as well can perhaps be mitigated to whatever extent is possible? And again, a lot of the coastal management plans also leave out certain livelihood groups and people who are dependent and who do live on these regions. So I think making sure that we don't make the same mistakes of the past plans as well as, but also can leverage on some of the good things. For instance, the DP does refer that, rehabilitation within 2 kilometers. I think that is also important. And I mean, is my time up, Lubena? Is that why you're coming on?
Almost, yeah.
Okay, so I'll just
quickly conclude, please.
Yeah, I'll just quickly conclude. I think finally, when we talk about impacts of flooding and water equity, but also the entire the plan itself, the principle of justice, I think I'm not bringing this up last because it's least important, but I think it's because it impinges on everything that we've all spoken about, and we do need to look at it as core. And if you look at all solutions to, say, flooding, and they are responsive and mainly focus on the climate event or the infrastructure issues that are arising from that climate event. But I do think we need to find a way to include a social justice response to all these events. For instance, water, sanitation, and flooding are all impacting, particularly post-COVID. And if people are shifted temporarily, for instance, what happens to their homes once they return? What are the health risks? What about loss of livelihoods? I do think so. This perspective into the planning we do, so that our response is not just to the climate event or the scientific, environment, but also the social justice aspect. I think that's important. And also looking at, whatever response is, it's also it's a social protection response as well, because the vulnerability will increase going ahead after these risks. And I think that's very important. Finally, I agree with Amita that we do need to look at a decentralized way to helping in adaptation for these extreme events, community-based disaster preparedness, really looking at ward level, what are the local groups there, what are the feedback mechanisms that can be integrated. That is something I think the plan can really center and hopefully take forward. Yeah. So,
thank you so much, Roshni. I mean, these are really, I think the whole importance of and focus on social protection is something that we need to bring. And I think more and more cities are looking at issues of like even different kinds of insurance that can be made available based on risks that cities are facing. So yeah, these are great points, and thank you for sharing them. I will call now ask Mr. Sitaram Shelar, who is the director of Center for Promoting Democracy, to speak about his work in the space of water access for years. Sitaram.
Thank you, Lubena. Thank you, WRI, Vatavaran, and Mumbai Municipal Corporation. Yeah, so I just want to point 3-4 basic fundamental points. There are a lot of knowledge, it's already there. I just wanted to say that all that knowledge, what we want to create out of it.
Sitaram, if you can speak a bit louder, we're actually on one speaker in BMC, so if maybe we're just feeling a bit.
Okay, I'll try.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, but okay. So like 97% of the water supply of this city is from the external sources. Okay, and this city is always demanding more water from the external sources, and we are not taking care of our surface water sources. There is a MMR EIS report prepared by Adakars Associate and shared to the municipal corporation, and are requested that see, there are these all are the water surface water sources, and please protect them, conserve them. It's not only Pavai, Vihar, and Tulsi. There are hundreds of lakes, hundreds of ponds need to be protected and preserved. But we are so land hungry that we are actually filling them up and then mentioning that as a land development. Okay, so how we can actually means there is a need to think about that kind of a policy making and perspective of the policy. Are we really not, means what is the right we have that to access the water from that districts who are now struggling for their irrigation? And in Marathi, it's a very term we use like a maz. So आम्ही माजलेलो आहोत असं एक मुंबई सगळ्यांना सांगते. So this is more arrogant of power, arrogant of resources, arrogant of finances. That arrogance is coming into this whole planning. We need to clearly deal with that aspect. Again, when we are coming to how it is, if the water is coming to the city, and is it really reaching to the everyone? And we are clearly looking that, and we can observe that there is a 2 million people. We are officially denying them the water supply by our policy, by our procedures. Even the state government want to provide water to all. Central government want to provide water to all. When it comes to the municipal corporation, Bombay Municipal Corporation, corporation clearly take a stand that we are not allowing other people to get access from our water supply, and it's official. Mumbai Municipal Corporation in 2007, after High Court's judgment, provide water to all, prepared a water policy named like Water for All policy. And it starts with these following people will be excluded from this policy. And people living nearby the seashore, people living at this height or a steep area, or people living on the central government land, private land, or any vital project land or something. Homeless people could not have access to the water supply. Payment people will not have access to water supply. So it's the whole policy is exclusionary, and it's clear exclusion by the policy. I think that this equity cannot be dealt without dealing with this policy exclusion. And I think that this need to be taken in the consideration, and really it should be what we can say the amend, the real in principle, in sense that it should be an equitable water supply and water supply for all, because it's not only these 2 million people's issue. The people is that this 42% people who are living in a people's settlement, they are not having the equal water supply who are the people as the people living in the building. So like these people are having a water supply, because the kind of a pipe network developed by the municipal engineers is like the 45 LPCD will reach to every person. Then, however, you are getting connections, but you can get maximum access to the 45 LPCD, and that because that is kind of the system is developed, I think, or late. So that need to be dealt with, and our recommendation is that because if you go to the water charges regulations, it clearly says that 140, 150 LPCD for all, but that is not reality, because by engineering, you are excluding people, or you are reducing the access to the people. So how these engineering of exclusion need to be dealt with, and that's why how in always in Indian history, water is used as a weapon to actually debar the people or exclude the people, and that's why we can see us many Bahishkrut Mumbais in the Mumbai. So how that Bahishkrut Mumbais will get access to the water supply and even sanitation, because in sanitation, Swachh Bharat Abhiyan came with the guideline, and then Maharashtra government announced the Saptapadi of the Swachhata, and then it says that water sanitation for all. Again, it came to the Mumbai Municipal Corporation, and corporation came with two-liner certificate that this Swachh Bharat Abhiyan will be only applicable to pre-2000 slums. So adamant, and there is a open defecation. That kind of a situation, it is actually risking a life. And in during this Corona kind of a pandemic, you are not really considering it. I think that it is not about the short thing. It's about the how, because from this pandemic, we should learn that if one person is affected, then the whole city is affected. So this public health is really a serious concern and need to be dealt with. And this access to the sanitation, because Amita ma'am says that the personal toilets, and then we are for that, and then the next issue will come that in slums, it's only a slum area of 8% is connected to the sewerage. 92% of the slums are not connected to the sewerage. They are paying for the sewerage charges, but they are not connected to the sewerage. How that we can actually take on the discussion, and how that sewerage network can be built. So that is the another proposal I have to make. So so another thing is, it's always the supply side of management. Why we are not doing the demand side management? Yeah, I just want to mention that Mumbai Municipal Commissioner apologized to the Malabar Hill people that he is reducing their water supply from 300 LPCD to 250 LPCD. Then what is actually, why that apology? Because there should be upper cap. There's an upper cap that no person will get more than 150 LPCD. That kind of steps need to be articulate in the rules. Then there is another thing about demand side management is means it leads to the new dams. Now we are saying we may reconsidering the Gargai Pinja, but we are looking at another options. We are going to the desalination. I don't know why. Means, is there no environmental impact to that? And when we are having 35% of the NRW, non-revenue water, then why we are going to the municipal desalination? This NRW is increased in a planned manner. This NRW was 20% in 2009. It increased now to 35%. Why? Because in 2006, we take a decision to close down the leak detection and prevention cell in the municipal corporation. It was established in the municipal corporation. We kill that cell, and then we allow the leak. Why? Means it's actually we are planning these disasters, and very thoughtfully we are planning these disasters. I think every municipal engineer is aware about it. And then I just want to say about how it is impacting the finance, that our study is clearly stating that if you and me are paying 5 rupees for a 1000 liter water, then the people who are living in these informal settlements, they have to pay of 500 rupees. It's 100 times more. And other social anxiety and exploitation is very different. Then in a health corona, you just relate that Hath Dua, Niyamit Hath Dua, and how that will connect with this. I think even this vulnerability, what Roshni mentioned about the like more slums are residing nearby this flood plains or seashores. As well, I just want to remind one case, which is Malad, Kurar village. Malad, Kurar village people, we want to save our forest. So that's why we asked them, we will give them a rehabilitation, you pay a money. So they paid a money in 1995. They are, and then High Court says that we will not provide them access to the water, sanitation, road, health, not education, no. And we will give you rehabilitation in 18 months. From 1995, now 221. It's more than a 25 years. This generation means around 14,000 families are waiting for their rehabilitation on that area. And then we build a security wall, municipal corporation, which security wall was clearly indicating that that will become a dam. And
Yeah.
then that literally became a dam in 2019, and the wall collapsed. And 31, we lost 31 people lives. And how irresponsible we are. So I think that these things means flood as well as these landslides plus this kind of a human made or engineer made uh, cala- calamity prone structures need to
Yeah.
be thought out.
If Sitaram, you're a bit over time, so if you can
Yeah,
close.
yeah. We give me 1 minute. Yeah, then how we can actually conserve and protect our lakes and ponds. That is clearly MMRES gives you a very thorough plan, and municipal corporation can take it on the table and work around it. Uh, there is means there is another thing about the rainwater harvesting. Rainwater harvesting is a false, because only in a high court, municipal corporation give a affidavit that only 3 to 5% buildings have a functional rainwater harvesting systems, and 97 to 96% buildings are not having a functional systems. They have a systems, but not
Yeah.
functional. So I think that need to be taken care
Yeah.
of. And other 2 points is
Um,
about
sorry, you're
yeah,
yeah.
2 points, 2 sentences. One is we need to develop our own, protect and conserve our own water resources. We need to distribute water supply on an equity basis. And we need to stop this mindset of policymakers and practitioners in a system of this creating Bahishkrit Mumbais and playing with the water. I think we need to stop that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. These are great points. Rhea, if you can, if we can have you submit your final recommendations for today. Rhea Shah is a landscape architect and environmental designer, and she'll speak about the importance of a landscape approach, building on actually a lot of points that have been reiterated repeatedly today. Thanks, Rhea.
Thanks, Diana, and thank you everyone for having me here. And it's been such an interesting session so far, and I feel like a lot of the points that I thought I would bring up are already sort of covered, which is very reinforcing to know that we all think on similar lines and our suggestions come from the same place. But here I go anyway. From a landscape architecture perspective, I'd say the first and primary point of view here is that disasters are not natural. They are entirely man-made. Natural phenomena like cyclones or cloudbursts lead to disasters or disastrous floods only when cities are designed to resist these hydrological systems rather than work with them. And it is essential that we, from a landscape architecture perspective, to start to see cities as a part of these natural systems. For instance, like the system of estuaries on which Mumbai is built, and acknowledge that they shape and change these natural systems, but are also shaped and changed by these natural systems as they grow. And our aim, I suppose, here is to adapt cities and their growth to work in harmony with and amplify these ecological systems that they are a part of. And in part, this requires a reimagination of land and water and the divisions we create within it. And as sort of Dakuna and Mathur have pointed out multiple times, as long as we continue to imagine the coast as a fixed line on a map, or a river as a fixed line on a map, we will continue to see floods. And there is absolutely no alternative to this. And so flood management, often fails to see this landscape architecture perspective, which leads to failures despite so much expertise and investment in solutions for flood management. Waters escape dams and levees, and the higher the dam, the greater the flood that breaks through it. So it seems that a lot of our flood management exacerbates, as many of our previous respondents have said before, that it seems to exacerbate the floods or exacerbate the problems rather than deal with them. And I think this will continue to happen as long as we see the river or sea in purely hydrological terms, and deal with them in localized interventions rather than, see an aqueous landscape and act within it. And so in order to create flood resilience, especially within the context of Mumbai, I think we need to do two things primarily. One is to redefine the problem through a systems dynamics and landscape architecture perspective. And that is to understand Mumbai's estuarine coastal landscape as an open network of aqueous, geological, ecological, climatological, but even socio-cultural and economic and infrastructural systems that cannot be worked upon in isolation. And the second is to to add to what Roshni was saying earlier, and is to sort of expand our ideas of data and our ground of design to start to become more inclusive and fluid, and which will sort of help us affect increase the inclusiveness of our solutions, and also fight this engineering of exclusion, as Sitaram put it a little before me. And to come back to systems thinking, when we think of flooding from this systems thinking perspective, we see that multiple systems heavily intersect with each other. And as Lubaina previously pointed out, that waste management affects stormwater drainage due to clogging, or air pollution determines the moisture carrying capacity of the air and affects the amount of cloudburst we have. But the agencies, all of these problems are sort of dealt with in isolated silos within our administrative structures. And so it's essential that the Climate Action Plan starts to think of itself as a collaborative device that forges this cross-agency dialogue and creates a continuity of solutions across all of these metrics. Again, sort of reiterating much of what is said, solutions need to be a comprehensive system, and particularly they need to highlight soft infrastructure, policy and planning, and even social and cultural resilience, rather than just focusing on hard infrastructures we've seen in the past. And this requires a very transdisciplinary approach, one where engineers and administrators bring in landscape architects, ecologists, sociologists, scientists, urban designers, environmentalists, and most importantly, residents, to and bring them on board to sort of design more effective or more nuanced solutions. This also means that spaces and interventions deal with complex problems simultaneously. So public spaces, for instance, in addition to leisure, also create environmental and economic benefits. Or the cleaning of the Mithi, for instance, also includes cultural interventions that deal with littering, but also solid waste disposal and sewage treatment plans that prevent future clogging. And again, that there's a great importance to sort of teach and educate publics, but also to become a part of our social memory and a part of our collective agency, ideas of climate change and also extreme flooding events that we have seen in the past. And this also needs to be a part of the Climate Action Committee. And secondly, to think of data expansion, to expand our sense of data. And to that, we must address the questions: what counts as data, who collects it, who has access to it. In addition to numerical scientific data and maps, and we have to sort of include crowdsourced, bottom-up observational data, even experiences and stories, in combination with historical and ecological data, all of which thicken the ground on which we act or on which we design our solutions. And effective resilience plans, needs to operate at this really vast scale, which is the scale of the watershed or the scale of the waterscape. But this landscape or this waterscape is really expansive, especially in the city. This creates various vulnerabilities and various sort of possibilities across the landscape. And so we also have to think of the decentralization in terms of the collection of data, but also in terms of implementation of solutions. So while the design of the Climate Action Plan continues to be at a very large scale, perhaps our interventions can be extremely localized or small and deal, and we have public discussions, data collection drives, participatory design meetings, all at a ward scale to test out these solutions before they're actually implemented. Again, to sort of reiterate what has been said before, but to utilize and expand information networks and so leverage various indigenous systems that already exist in the city to understand monsoonal and tidal changes. The police, for instance, work very closely with the Coast Guards to inform early warning systems. Or you have WhatsApp groups amongst long distance commuters in the city that identify places where there's heavy rainfall or potential flooding, or even blockages on roads and trains. And these systems need to become a part of the public imagination. They need to be institutionalized and scaffolded to create, again, nuanced design solutions, as well as a social resilience system to deal with natural events, extreme natural events. Again, flooding data needs to be nuanced. Flood waters are not simply water; they are tidal or saline waters, they are fresh or monsoonal waters, they're untreated sewage or city drained storm water. They're also the moisture that affects the city's infrastructure. And to simply deal with one sort of colossal monolithic idea of water means that we don't recognize that there are aerobic and anaerobic changes that continue to act on these waters differently. And so, infrastructures also act on the city's hydrology really deeply. So if you think of a historical analysis, you'll see that the first sort of causeways across the creeks, whether it's Mahim Creek or Sivri Creek, changed tidal flows and created new ground and siltation all the way up to the Bombay Harbor. And it's really essential that we start to examine also all the infrastructure that exists, but also all the infrastructure that we plan in terms of this system of water and in terms of sanitation and hydration. Thanks, Lubana. I'm just wrapping up. Yeah. And so, in summary, I think understanding the city through a systems thinking perspective, expanding our idea of data and its collection through public and indigenous knowledge are essential to create a dynamic and equitable flood resilience system. Additionally, I think, and this is my last point, that the system requires fluidity in terms of feedback loops. We need to re-examine and re-adapt both the data as well as the designed and implemented solutions continuously for changing climatic sort of context. And this helps the solutions to be sort of grounded in time rather than in form, and helps us focus on practices of bolstering and maintenance rather than imagining our interventions as a single moment, one-time solution for climate change. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rhea. And thank you, everyone. We are I thought we'd actually have lots of time today, but clearly we're way over time. Really a good end to a very empowering and an informative series of consultations. I want to thank everyone. I mean, all of you for being there today, and all the speakers who contributed. Rhea, if you can mute yourself, we're getting some feedback. Sorry. All the speakers who shared their recommendations and feedback on all the series, all our consultations so far. Thank you very much. Everyone who's been submitting feedback into on the Mumbai Climate Action Plan website. Encourage all of you to please share more, and we are kind of cataloging the feedback, and we will be integrating a lot of it into the plan. So thank you very much. I just want to quickly also invite this. Oh, sir, I think I have. Yeah. I want to invite the Deputy Chief Engineer, Stormwater Drain, Mr. Shri Prashant Tayshete, to give us a vote of thanks.
Thank you all the panelists for submitting their recommendations. We'll take these concerns into account as we formalize the Mumbai Climate Action Plan. I have to state here that we have taken various major measures for abating the flooding from last 5 to 6 years. We have constructed big stormwater drain pumping stations. In city, there are total 4 numbers of pumping stations. In suburb, there are 2 numbers of pumping stations, which are generally operated during high tide, when we restrict the high tide water to entry in the stormwater drain by closing the floodgates. And during this coincidence of heavy rainfall, then we operate the pumps for dewatering the same water from up. Also, we have provided from last 2 or 3 years, we have provided some mini pumping stations to arrest mini pumping stations with floodgates for Mithi River, Wakola River, and at Tayshete River also. We also stop the high tide water to enter in the stormwater drain by closing the gates, floodgates, and also when the high tide coincide with heavy rain, then we operate the pumps, which are generally operated on the DG set. These are small pumping stations. About 25 numbers of pumping stations we have installed, and these are also commissioned last year. And also this year we have constructed 2 big holding ponds near our Hindamata, because in the last so many years, Hindamata is a chronic flooding spot. This year we have constructed 15,000 meter cube and 11,000 meter cube 2 holding ponds nearby the Hindamata. So during high tide, when there is a heavy raining, we dewater all this flooded area, and we have collected all this water into holding pond at Pramod Mahajan Garden and Saint Xavier Garden. And this year also we had given so much relief for flooding for Hindamata. Also, this year after monsoon is over, we have taken one big project of installation of trash booms to arrest the floating material or garbage to enter in the sea. At major, there are 9 locations total, city and suburb, for Mithi River, Wakola River. So we'll arrest all the floating material to enter in the sea, and to all the coastal area will be clean. That's why. Also, I'm thankful to all our partners, Government of Maharashtra, for providing the forward-thinking leadership to the MCAP, and WR India, Climate Voices, Vatavaran for their support on the plan and executing this consultation on behalf of PMC. Thank you.
Thank you again, everyone. Really happy to have been in this panel today. Thank you.